Welcome back to the Marvel Movie Minute, a daily podcast in which we assemble to explore the films of the Marvel Cinematic Universe 1 minute at a time. In this, our 6th season, we are looking at the Avengers. I'm Andy Nelson from the Next Reel Film Podcast.
And I'm Pete Wright, and today, we get the rightful beginning of this movie.
That's right. Today we are talking about Minute 2, which begins with the end of the Others monologue and ends with Fury's arrival.
The end of the Others monologue just sounds all broken.
I know. The end of the Others monologue. All right. So, Pete, before we begin, I was going to do this yesterday, and we was going a little long, so I figured we would just do it today. I wanted to just real quickly talk through the timeline for all of our key Avenger characters.
Sure.
Just so we have a sense as to kind of the timeline. I know we mentioned a little bit about kind of Nick's busy week that he had, but just looking at where things, according to the wiki, when things started happening, where people are, etc. So it all starts February 13th, 2009, when Tony Stark gets kidnapped by the Ten Rings. And then he escapes May 1st. And then the rest of the Iron Man story runs through November 25th, 2009, when he tells the news that he is Iron Man. That is when Nick Fury visits him and talks to him about the Avengers Initiative. So starting November 25th, 2009. Obviously, just as a caveat to all of this, we know that there's a whole lot of other stuff that's been going on that we find out in later films. We're just specifically at this point talking about these 5 films leading up to this point.
For sure.
Just a side note, I did find this on the wiki. February 25th, 2010, that's when Maria Hill was issued her SHIELD badge.
Oh.
Now you know. Yeah, so she's only been working with Nick a few years.
Not very long.
Not very long. May 21st, 2010, this is when Tony meets his new personal assistant, Natalie Rushman, who, of course, we find out is actually Black Widow, Natasha Romanoff.
Black Widow.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
May 29th, 2010, this is when Bruce Banner gets through U.S. Customs from his time in Central and South America. So everyone's kind of working their way up.
Right. It was like he was a whole different person back then.
Like, who was that guy? May 31st, so a couple days later, Odin casts Thor out of Asgard, sending him down to Earth to learn some lessons. That's also the same day that Tony has his big battle at the Stark Expo, and Black Widow infiltrates Hammer Industries headquarters.
Okay.
The next day, Clinton Barton had been sent by Nick to New Mexico, and this is when he arrives to help Coulson out. And that's where Hawkeye, we see for the first time in the films, we see him in Thor as Thor is infiltrating the SHIELD compound, and he's trying to figure out if he should shoot or not. And of course,
in the maze of tents.
In the maze of tents. That's the hamster maze. That's right. The next day, Hulk and Emil Blonsky fight at Clover University. And I think it was in the comics where it's revealed that Natasha had actually been sent by Nick to watch what's going on and to be there in case somebody needed help. So she's actually there watching.
At Culver University.
At Culver University. She's watching the two of them fight and just on the ready in case she's needed.
But we don't know that in the MCU.
Correct. I think that's revealed in a one of the Prelude comics or something.
Tie-in things, yeah.
That's the same day that the battle at Puente Antiguo happens between Thor and the Destroyer.
Okay.
And when Thor goes back to Asgard and duels with Loki on the bridge.
So, wait a minute. Thor is fighting with the Destroyer of Puente Antiguo while the Hulk is fighting Blonsky at Culver University.
Exactly.
And those stories don't cross one another in the media. It just feels like those would be things that maybe get some coverage.
You'd think they should.
In each other's movies.
You'd think they should. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right.
So anyway, Loki, that's the day, as we talked about in our last minute yesterday, that's when Loki falls into the wormhole and apparently is drifting through space for a few years before somehow he ends up in Sanctuary. So several days later, June 4th, that's when Hulk and Abomination battle in Harlem. The next day, the World Security Council grants Fury the funds that he needs for S.H.I.E.L.D. to examine the Tesseract and put into action the Avengers Initiative. Now things are starting to move toward this Avengers Initiative, which I guess, I don't know, he told Tony about it November 25th, 2009, and I guess it took until this point to see what had happened in Harlem for the World Security Council to say, okay, you know what, I guess you can have some funds for it, I guess.
Right, right. They're not the most responsive.
They're not. 2 days later, June 7th, that's when Fury approaches Eric Selvig about helping with the Tesseract, and that's also where we see that Loki is controlling Selvig's mind at that particular point in time. Again, from where? Who knows? Was he on Sanctuary? Was he in some other place and astral projecting himself to control Eric's mind? We don't know, but that's what was happening, and that's how he knows, I guess, that the Tesseract is there. I guess this is a question. It makes it seem like Thanos didn't know the Tesseract was there, and Loki sees it at that particular point, and maybe he's the one who tells Thanos that it's there?
Oh, that's naughty. But that's got to be the only way to explain it.
Which also makes me wonder if Thanos doesn't realize that it's the Infinity Stone yet, which maybe makes sense why Thanos doesn't go himself to get it.
Yeah. Because Thanos, every other experience we have with Thanos, he's very hands-on.
Very hands-on, right.
Yeah.
All right. So anyway, a month later, almost, July 5th, 2010, this is when Tony goes to talk to General Ross about getting Emil Blonsky on the team, but he manages to piss General Ross off, so he will not release Blonsky to S.H.I.E.L.D. This, of course, was all that Marvel one-shot where you have Coulson and Sitwell basically in the diner talking about all of this. It's that whole setup. So Blonsky is not going to be released, and I guess the Hulk will be. Okay, so now they're slowly getting a team. No Blonsky, but you've got Tony, obviously Black Widow, and Clint at this point. So those three are on board, and Nick is trying to figure out what to do with this team. A little later that year, December 15th, that's when Tony starts working on Stark Tower in New York City. Mm-hmm. October 5th, now we're jumping almost a year. October 5th, 2011, this is when the Valkyrie is discovered in the Arctic along with Captain America. October 6th, Clint is sent to babysit Eric Selvig at this testing facility, which we're looking at here. The next day, October 7th, 2011, this is when Steve wakes up. This is what we see at the very end of Captain America. And that's when Nick recruits him to join his team. Now we jump from October 2011 to April 2012. Loki makes a deal with Thanos. And interestingly, and I think this was in one of the comics, Frigga realizes that he's alive. She tries to communicate with him in Sanctuary. He refuses to respond, but she tells Odin and Thor that Loki is alive.
She tells Odin and Thor that Loki is alive, which is why Thor goes to find Loki in the first place, landing on the plane later in the movie.
Exactly. That's how all of that happens. And of course, there's no Rainbow Bridge, so we'll talk about that later when Thor actually does arrive as to how he gets here.
And I think this is a very good question. And I have to ask this question, why, Andy, is this movie made in any way better not telling us that that's how Thor finds his way to Loki? Like, why is that in a comic tie-in?
There are a lot of little things. I mean, it's interesting. I mean, they throw a lot of this stuff in comics. Some of it is just, pieces that you kind of pull from all these different movies as you're building it together. But
Sure.
And obviously there's one-shots that we're including in this. So they kind of spread this stuff out. It's like talking about the Matrix films and then talking about the Animatrix and going, okay, well, if that happened in the Animatrix, what does this mean for the Matrix? And so I guess it's one of those sense of scope of world building. So
totally. I just think it's important to at least note that some of these questions that the filmmakers are asking, it's important to at least litigate whether or not the decision they came to move that decision out of the narrative and put it in something else was a good one. And I think some of them in this movie, it was not a good one. I think it's helpful to know some of the background that they chose to omit and put elsewhere. I think the movie would be better if it had a little bit more of an explainer to it in some cases. And I think we're going to run into more of these questions. So I'm just setting it up. Foundationally, I want to poke at those things.
One of the interesting things about that is the fact, and we talked about this in yesterday's Minute, the fact that they were still figuring this out as they are going along. And
yes.
Obviously, when you watch the Marvel one-shot about Blonsky, when we saw that, it wasn't really a post-credit scene, but kind of end of the movie in The Incredible Hulk, when Tony shows up to talk about General Ross, the audience is meant to think that Tony is trying to get Bruce Banner, Hulk, to kind of join the team. It's only that one shot that switches the entire story and repaints it after the fact to go, oh, it's actually Emil Blonsky that they're trying to recruit.
Yeah.
And so it's interesting. Like they start trying to figure out ways, okay, but what if we did this to kind of cover that up, you know? And it's...
Well, and also that's a different kind of twist. And I think that's a good one. Like that repainting perspectives is really fun.
Sure.
Just like background, like how the hell did he know to go get him on that plane? It's just magic and Thor Odin magic. I don't know. But knowing that there was a connection between these two characters through their mother might have been an interesting nod.
Yeah, no, I agree.
Okay.
I definitely agree.
All right.
Okay. All right. So anyway, that all is basically kind of setting up. Now we've got all of our players. We kind of have a sense as to how all of this has been going over the last few years, as far as where people are. And now we're in this situation where we're still coming in at the beginning of this minute with the other pitching to Thanos about their plans, which, again, doesn't really seem to tie in at all with Loki at this point. Other than Loki, I guess what they're saying is Loki gets Earth, you get the universe. That's kind of... And again, he doesn't even say Loki. If you're not a careful watcher, you probably don't even know that he's handing the scepter to Loki because you can barely make out that kind of green and gold outfit. But otherwise, it's like he gave the scepter to some guy. I didn't get to see who it was. Somebody's going to get Earth. Somebody else I don't know is going to get the universe. And I'm talking, and all I know is I'm hearing a voice of a guy who I've only seen his back.
He's got his green robes, though, which means you only actually know who he's handing it to in rewatch.
Yeah.
And by the time you finish this movie, you've already forgotten that the movie actually opened with this weird post-credit, pre-credit scene, and you thought that it just opened with the helicopter flying over the ridge and into the dark energy research facility.
Yes.
Which is where the movie should start in the first place.
Where the movie should start. Absolutely. Well, let's jump to that. So we're going to the mountain range and we see a helicopter. It flies over the top of the mountain range. The camera comes up and over and we see, as it's scripted, a SHIELD/NASA facility that is actually, as you said, it's the Joint Dark Energy Mission Western Division. This is all part of Project Pegasus and the NASA Space Radiation Facility and the SHIELD Accelerator Test Facility. A lot of stuff going on in this one particular place.
And the place comes back, and we see the place throughout the rest of the universe, the MCU. It comes back a few times.
Not in the future, though. It's only in stories that take place in the past, because it kind of...
Exactly, yeah.
It kind of...
Yeah, that's
we're
funny.
watching them evacuate as we come to it right now. In fact.
That's actually a really good point.
Yeah.
We see that it comes back in later movies that are filmed earlier, that take place earlier.
Yeah.
Good note, important note. Yeah.
And I guess that's a good question. Like, what do you think of the idea of coming into a situation that seems like we're in the middle of some situation that's happening? What is going on? Do I need to know, or is this just designed to kind of get me curious and get me excited? Like, how does it strike you?
I love it. I love it so much. I love the drama of the helicopter flying over the ridge, the facility sprawling out with all the lights on. I think it's a great setup. Everybody is clearly in a state of urgency. I think it's fantastic. And, I love knowing what is going on. There's something going on here that is so important and so powerful that everybody needs to run from place to place. That's cool. And we get the hero shot of our favorite characters getting off the helicopter. I'm in. Like, I am involved in the story immediately.
Well, I agree. I think coming into a story this way, and we'll talk about this more tomorrow once our characters start talking, but it already feels like something is happening. There's an energy of action.
You might call it like a dark energy.
You might call it a dark energy.
Super dark.
Yeah, very, very much so. Well, it is very dark on screen. That's for sure.
For sure.
But there is this frantic energy of everybody running around and you don't know what you're coming into. And I think that's an interesting way to start the film because it does allow for you to immediately start asking questions.
Yeah, and it puts our character, we know our characters are getting to work. Like our favorite character, like we get Nick Fury and he's about to go to work. We get to see him in action immediately. And that's good. We don't have to dance around. What does this guy do all day?
It's not just walking around and recruiting people.
Yeah.
which is kind of what we've seen him doing mostly.
Absolutely.
Up to this point, yeah. Agent Coulson is here, so we get him too.
But he's dressed like Neo from The Matrix.
Yes, I love that he's got the shades on at night.
Yep.
At this facility. The lights are just so bright here, Pete.
They're so bright.
These shield
photophobic
lights. They have special shield lights.
Yeah. They're shield lights.
And we get Agent Maria Hill. Now, we talked about her in yesterday's minute because she is in the alternate opening for the film. But this is where we are getting introduced to the character of Agent Maria Hill in the films. And you know what that means, Pete?
What does it mean, Andy?
It means we're doing the IMDb game for Kobe Smulders.
Yes, it does.
Kobe Smulders, IMDb game. Pete, if you had to guess, what would you say are the 4 projects that Kobe Smulders is most known for?
Well, I struggle with this, but mostly because I don't know many other movies that Kobe Smulders has done. I have to imagine How I Met Your Mother is on that list at some point. I have to imagine that. It would be an insane fracture of IMDb not to include How I Met Your Mother in her known for. It would relegate IMDb to one of the stupidest services on the internet. And we know, Andy, that IMDb is not one of those incredibly insipid services. It's a high-performing website that knows what known for should mean. So am I right about that? Is How I Met Your Mother on the list?
She was in 208 episodes of How I Met Your Mother, Pete. Robin Scherbatsky.
Yep.
And it is not one of her 4 known fors. What is IMDb doing?
Oh my God.
What are they doing?
Oh my God.
We know they have some wacky algorithm that kind of puts things up for their known fors, but to not have that on there as her number 1, I would say should be her number 1.
It is her number 1.
And it's not on there.
Well, so I'm going to go with Avengers, this one, and I am assuming other Avengers, Age of Ultron.
Yes, the Avengers and Avengers Age of Ultron are both on her known for.
I have absolutely no clue what anything else that she would be on there.
Well, I will tell you, one of our other shows that we have is the Film Board, in which we talk about current releases. This was one that she did in 2016 with Tom Cruise, and we talked about it. And I
Jack Reacher.
Jack Reacher, never go back.
Never watch a Jack Reacher movie again.
Never watch Jack Reacher.
Never watch
never
again.
Go back again.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, it was.
Wow,
we had some issues with that one, but yeah, she was in that. Last but not least, Pete, it is a film called Safe Haven. Are you familiar with Safe Haven?
No, that's a made-up movie.
Lasse Hallström film from 2013. A young woman with a mysterious past lands in Southport, North Carolina, where her bond with a widower forces her to confront the dark secret that haunts her.
Wow.
Julianne Hough, Josh Duhamel, and Kobe Smulders. Safe Haven.
Wow. Haven't heard of it, but interesting.
That beats out How I Met Your Mother.
I cannot.
I
cannot believe that.
Yeah. I'm not that familiar with her career either, but I absolutely would have said How I Met Your Mother. I've never even seen the show. I just know she's like the woman in it.
Yeah. She is a central character in the group of characters. Right. She's a central character.
So, yeah, very peculiar. But...
IMDb.
Anyway, all right. So our next thing that we're tasked with, Pete, is when do we actually learn that this is Maria Hill? So we're going to have to remember, because we don't, at this point, no one speaks. She's not identified, though. So we'll just kind of pay attention. At what point does somebody say Maria Hill?
Okay.
All right. So she and Nick Fury arrive.
This minute.
It is not this minute, for sure. I will say, to your point, I really love that we get this fantastic power shot where we're low to the ground as she and Nick Fury get out of the helicopter. It's a great shot, fantastically constructed. And, we haven't mentioned, but Alan Silvestri's iconic Avengers theme starts in this minute. and we get that slow build, and we're getting the kind of like that driving energy of the theme as they're getting off the helicopter. It really sells this moment very, very well.
For sure. The location, too, is great. Do you want to talk about NASA for real just for a second?
Well, we can talk about NASA for real, but we're not actually in NASA yet. Do you know where we are?
No, we're not. We're at some weird school.
We're in a high school. It cracks me up to no end that for this, I mean, they were filming a lot of stuff for Thor in New Mexico. So it makes sense they're trying to find other locations there. They filmed all of this exterior here at a high school in New Mexico. We are at the Atrisco Heritage Academy High School. It is southwest of Albuquerque proper, I believe. And it really has kind of this cool look to it.
It's very cool.
Yeah, it's very cool. It's got kind of a whole bunch of big buildings. It has on one side, and then on the other side, it's all these kind of curved buildings coming around with a great big courtyard in the middle, which is where we're spending the bulk of our time. So all of this is filmed at this high school, which does not have a bank of satellites behind it, and it does not have a cliff in front of it. So a lot of digital...
Also, the producers are real sorry that we cratered your school.
That's right, by the way.
I wonder how memey that is at the school, like when kids get bad grades or something. I wonder how fast this clip of the school being destroyed gets sent around on Instagram.
Right?
That's funny.
Absolutely. But no, that's where we're seeing here. And we'll talk about these other scenes that we get because NASA definitely gets involved, which is fantastic.
Yeah. We'll talk about that in a minute.
Yeah. Project Pegasus is on the sign, Pete. Do you know about Project Pegasus?
What does Project Pegasus mean, Andy?
Project Pegasus stands for the Project Potential Energy Group Alternate Sources United States.
And we've seen of Project Pegasus in future movies set in the past.
Right, specifically Captain Marvel. It is the big point of that film. Wendy Lawson, who is the project leader in the 80s, who is actually Marvel, the Kree. She uses the Tesseract's energy. I didn't say Project Pegasus. The whole point of it was to study the Tesseract and harness its power. So they do that in the 80s. And of course, they build the Lightspeed engine as a whole thing of the Kree Skull War. We'll talk about that in many seasons in the future when we talk about Captain Marvel. But that's when Project Pegasus was created. And then it was terminated in 1989 after Marvel died. And then, as I was talking about earlier in this episode, the World Security Council funds Nick Fury to start the SHIELD initiative and to reactivate Pegasus to harness the power of the Tesseract. So all of that is going on. Again, I don't know. I guess it makes me wonder if the whole idea was brought to fruition because he kind of connected with Eric Selvig. Like, I guess I'm not really sure. Like, why did it ever stop? The study of it?
That's actually a really good question. Well, wait, in which timeline? Not timeline. What period? Why did it stop originally, or why did it stop again?
Why did it stop? Okay, well, I mean, conveniently, it all happens when a movie is around. From the time Howard finds it and pulls it out of the Arctic Sea, it's just sitting at Camp Lehigh facility. And people are like, well, one day we'll figure out what to do with that. Hey, we've got this lady in 1980 who showed up. Let's have her help.
Let's have her do it.
Let's have her do it. And she's dead. Well, let's put it back in the box.
Yeah.
I guess they couldn't find... I don't know. I guess that's, it's one of those things. It's needed for the movie, and so it's just in a storage container in the back of some SHIELD closet until they need it.
But you know what? It feels very much like a Raiders of the Lost Ark moment, right? Like things went south in Captain Marvel, right? Like things went south for Marvel in research around this energy. And it doesn't surprise me at all that the powers that be would say, you know what? We need to put this in a crate with a big stamp on it and send it to the back of the warehouse for a while, right? Like we're not ready. We're not ready for this. So let's put it away. Yeah. That's not a thing that I question along the process.
Well, and maybe, and I can't remember if there was a specific thing at the end of Captain Marvel that talked about it. I'm going to need to look at that film again sometime over the course of this season just to see.
We need to look at the end of that.
Yeah. But anyway, they haven't touched it until, like, we don't see the Tesseract again until that moment at the end of Thor when Nick Fury invites Eric Selvig to start helping. And so I guess the way that I read that is when Nick Fury starts hearing Eric Selvig talking about dark energy and all this sort of stuff, he kind of goes, you know what? There's that thing we should pull out again.
Right.
And start fiddling around with. It
is the answer to the question, why did you start building weapons? Because of him, that we get later in this movie. When Nick Fury points at Thor and says, you taught us that there was stuff out there that we don't understand and cannot fight, good guys and bad guys, I need to, dust off this project because this is a thing that I think is related to our challenges. And Nick Fury is the constant from that period to this one. So, of course, he would know.
Yeah, but of course, he already knew in Captain Marvel that things were out there. So anyway, we'll just put that aside.
I see what you're doing. You're last wording me. I'm going to give it to you this time.
I'm just saying, somebody was already out there and he knew about it. And then all of a sudden Thor showed up. Whoa!
Paperwork. He wasn't in a position of authority yet. He had not been given. He was quiet quitting. Because
what happened very sad. Is he heard Maria Hill was out for his job. He's like, no. I'm going to get this box and we're going to start playing around with it again.
Yes. That's what happened.
All right.
Somebody write that in a comic.
Quick. Last thing here, I do like quite a bit that as they're getting out of the helicopter, I was like, it's kind of a little bit of a Dutch angle, too. Look at that. Yeah. Thanks, Kenneth Branagh, for throwing those into the mix here at the MCU.
Kenneth, you've shown us what we're allowed to do.
That's right. I love it.
It's beautiful.
Yep.
Yeah. Good use of silhouettes, too. I think the lighting of the school around the dark energy mission, right? I think that it's just everything looks good, and I love the soldiers running by, and I think they're lit, darkly against bright surfaces. It's compelling, and again, it feels like electricity, moving along a circuit. I think it's cool. I think it's all very cool.
Yeah, a lot of energy. I like the way that it brings us into this situation where we just feel like, what the hell's going on? I also like, even though we know it's New Mexico, when we do see the license plate of one of the Acuras with the Acura logo, nice and prominent, thank you, Acura, the license plate just says exempt, and it has a shield logo on it instead of an actual state. I'm like, okay, that's a good way to just say this is everywhere and nowhere.
All at once.
That's right. All right. Well, let's call it quits for today. We'll be back tomorrow to talk about minute 3. So, Pete, thanks as always.
Thanks, Annie. I hope tomorrow's energy is just a little lighter.
Until next time, true believers.
Marvel Movie Minute is a production of True Story FM, engineering by Andy Nelson. This week's music is Message to the World by Anthony Vega, and this season's show art is by Winston Yabo. Find the show at truestory.fm, and if your podcast app allows ratings and reviews, please consider doing that for our show.